Introduction: The Human Myth. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, there were many stories told about the ancient species known as humans. To the advanced civilizations scattered across the stars, humanity was nothing more than a legend, a race that had disappeared long ago, leaving only whispers of their past. There were some who believed that humans never existed at all, that they were just a fairy tale invented by a forgotten world. Others claimed that the humans had been wiped out in a war so long ago that it was now just a distant memory. But to the few who still remembered, the idea of humans was something more. They had heard the stories, passed down through generations, of a species that was fierce, determined, and capable of astonishing feats. The tales spoke of how humanity had once reached the stars, only to be crushed by their own arrogance. Their downfall had been swift and brutal, and it was said that no trace of them remained. Still, there were those who refused to let go of the old stories. Some believed that humanity had simply retreated, waiting for the right moment to rise again. But no one knew for sure, not until that fateful day when the message arrived. It started as a small signal, intercepted by a deep space listening post on the outskirts of the galaxy. The message was faint, barely audible, but it carried a strange urgency. The beings who received it were not human, but their curiosity was piqued. They had heard the stories of humans, and the idea that the myth might be true sent a chill down their spines. The message, garbled and unclear, spoke of something ominous. A fleet, they said, was coming. A fleet that had been lost to time, but was now emerging from the depths of the unknown. The words were broken, distorted, but the message was unmistakable. We are coming back. The aliens who intercepted this message were both intrigued and terrified. The idea of a long-forgotten human fleet appearing after so many centuries was unthinkable. They could hardly believe it. But as the message played again and again across their communication networks, the fear began to grow. The myth of humanity was suddenly no longer a myth. It was a reality. The alien factions that had once dismissed humans as a joke now found themselves questioning everything they had ever known. How could a species that had been thought extinct for so long suddenly reappear with a fleet? What had happened to them? And most importantly, what did they want? Some factions dismissed it as a hoax, an attempt by another species to cause chaos. But as the message continued to play, doubt crept into their minds. Others were more fearful, immediately beginning to mobilize their forces, unsure of what humanity's return meant for the galaxy. If the humans had truly returned, what kind of power would they possess? Could they still be the same fierce and cunning species the legends spoke of? And what would they do when they arrived? As the days passed, more and more signals came in, each one more urgent than the last. It was clear now that the fleet was real. It was not a hoax or a simple transmission glitch. The humans were coming back, and they were bringing their fleet with them. The galaxy began to react. Diplomats from various worlds gathered, trying to figure out how to respond to the looming threat. Some suggested trying to make contact with the humans, offering peace and cooperation. Others proposed an alliance, thinking that the best way to deal with the humans was to unite against them before they could even reach their doorstep. But there were some who believed that humanity's return was a sign of something far worse. The rise of an empire, one that would crush everything in its path. It was then that the first glimpse of the human fleet appeared on the edge of the galaxy. It was a sight no one expected. A massive armada of ships, old but still powerful. The ships were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen, a strange mix of ancient technology and something far more advanced. They seemed to appear out of nowhere, as if they had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And strike they did. The first few ships that appeared were small, unarmed scout vessels, but they were fast, and they moved with a precision that spoke of long-forgotten military expertise. The aliens who encountered them were taken aback by the sheer skill and efficiency of their maneuvers. These ships may have been old, but they were still dangerous. They were part of something much larger, something more powerful. As the fleet emerged from the horizon, it became clear that humanity was not a myth. They had survived. They had grown stronger. And now, they were returning to claim their place in the galaxy. But no one knew what their return would mean. Was it a sign of peace, or was it the beginning of something far darker? One thing was certain: the galaxy would never be the same again. The first signs of humanity. The galaxy watched with bated breath as more and more ships appeared on the edge of known space. The first few scout ships were just the beginning. It wasn't long before the true scope of humanity's return became undeniable. The fleet grew larger, each new wave of ships carrying signs of old-world craftsmanship, their designs nearly forgotten by the galaxy's more advanced species. Yet despite their age, these ships had an aura of menace, each one a reminder of humanity's long-lost might. Rumors spread like wildfire, and every corner of the galaxy began to feel the weight of what was happening. Every faction, every empire, every government had a stake in the future of this new era. Would the humans come in peace, or had their exile been a long preparation for something far darker? The debate raged across boardrooms and battlefields alike. Meanwhile, on a quiet moon, far from the prying eyes of galactic powers, a small alien scout ship found something that would change everything. It was the first real proof that humanity had indeed not only survived, but had thrived in the shadows of the universe. The ship, which had been sent to investigate a remote section of space, stumbled upon a human vessel, drifting alone and seemingly abandoned. The ship was a relic of a time long past, old, battered, but undeniably human. The hull was scratched and scarred from battles long fought, and the markings on the ship were unmistakably from Earth. But the most chilling part of the discovery came when the scout's crew opened the ship's data logs. In the silence of deep space, a voice echoed through the darkness. It was human, though distorted and faint, but unmistakable. The words were chilling in their simplicity. "We are still here, waiting, coming soon." The aliens who discovered the message were shaken. They had never expected to find something like this. What did it mean? Why had humanity been gone for so long? And where had they been hiding? The implications were far-reaching, but the answer seemed beyond the reach of any single alien species. The message was not just a warning. It was a statement. The humans were not just returning. They were prepared. The alien scout ship immediately transmitted the discovery back to its home planet. The higher-ups at the alien government quickly ordered a full investigation, but something about the message gnawed at them. The humans had been gone for centuries, so how could they have been waiting? Waiting for what? Tensions began to rise. What if humanity had been preparing for this moment all along? The fleet's sudden reemergence couldn't be a coincidence. A fleet so large, so formidable, couldn't be an accident or a mistake. The truth became undeniable. Humanity had been building in secret, planning for something more than just survival. They had been biding their time. And now, the time had come. As the galaxy's factions scrambled to understand the growing threat, another disturbing sign appeared. It wasn't just the ships. Strange energy signatures began to appear on the outskirts of known space, signals that seemed to be coming from human technology. But these weren't ordinary signals. They were something else. They were too advanced for the humans of old, too refined for the simple survivors that had been imagined by many. The humans had not just been hiding. They had been learning, adapting, and growing more powerful in ways no one had anticipated. On the far side of the galaxy, a coalition of alien forces met to discuss the growing problem. They had to act fast. The human fleet was moving closer, and each passing day brought more ships. The fear was spreading that humanity was not returning simply to take a place among the stars, but to take control of them. The old myths, which had been thought to be nothing more than fairy tales, were suddenly coming to life, and with every passing hour, the myth became reality. Meanwhile, the human fleet continued its silent march across the galaxy, its purpose unclear to all but those who would soon learn the truth. What had once been a myth was now an undeniable force, and humanity, it seemed, was not going to be ignored any longer. A fleet emerges from the horizon. The galaxy could no longer deny what was happening. The human fleet had become an undeniable reality. What had once been whispered in dark corners of space, what had once been thought of as nothing more than a child's bedtime story, was now on full display for the galaxy to see. Humanity, long thought extinct, had returned, more powerful, more determined than anyone had expected. As the human fleet moved closer to the galactic core, it became clear that it wasn't just a few ships, it was an armada. An armada that grew larger with every passing day. Ancient warships, some from centuries ago, had been restored to full fighting condition, while others appeared to have been upgraded with technology that none of the galaxy's existing powers could comprehend. The ships were old, yes, but their designs had been updated in ways that defied expectation. The fleet had not only survived, it had adapted. For the galaxy's most advanced species, this was a terrifying thought. If humanity had survived this long, had hidden away for centuries, what kind of power could they now wield? What kind of empire had they built while the rest of the galaxy had been focused on their own progress? The ancient stories of human strength, ingenuity, and resourcefulness had been true, perhaps even more so than anyone could have imagined. And now the first true glimpse of the fleet appeared. It wasn't a single ship or even a handful. It was an entire armada, an overwhelming force that stretched across the horizon of space like a dark storm cloud rolling in. The sheer size of it was staggering. For the first time in centuries, alien ships had to look up at the dark shapes that moved ever closer, their engines humming with an unfamiliar power. The first few human ships had been cautious, scout ships testing the waters, appearing in uninhabited sectors, keeping their distance from the more populated areas of the galaxy. But now, their presence was undeniable. The fleet's flagship, massive and imposing, led the way, cutting through the stars with cold precision. It was clear that the humans weren't here just to explore or negotiate. They were here with purpose. The galaxy's ruling factions watched with growing concern as the human ships made their way through space. Desperation spread as they scrambled to understand what was happening. Could they communicate with these long-lost people? Could they reach out and try to form an alliance, perhaps? Or was this the beginning of a galactic takeover? Meanwhile, on a distant station, high-ranking diplomats and military leaders gathered. They had prepared for this moment for weeks, trying to find any way to understand the human fleet's movements. But each transmission that came through only deepened the mystery. The humans were silent. Their ships didn't send out friendly signals, didn't broadcast the usual diplomatic beacons that other species used. There was no peace offering, no sign of intent other than their slow, steady advance. All attempts at communication were met with silence. The only response to the galaxy's desperate calls was the sound of the fleet's engines, echoing through space like the heartbeat of a ghost. But the humans weren't just ignoring the galaxy's communications. They were sending a message of their own. The transmissions that were finally received contained no words, no typical human greetings or requests for peace. Instead, they were filled with data, a complex pattern of numbers, coordinates, and symbols no one could easily decode. The one message that could be deciphered with certainty came through loud and clear, transmitted across multiple channels. It was short and simple. We returned to reclaim what was ours. The words hit like a shockwave. There was no mistaking the message now. Humanity wasn't here to beg for a place among the stars. They weren't here to ask for help. They were here to take, and they would not be stopped. Panic swept through the galaxy's governments and military powers. They had always known that the humans were strong, resilient, but they had never expected this. A fleet this vast, this powerful, couldn't have appeared overnight. It had taken years, decades perhaps, of secret planning, building, and gathering forces. And it wasn't just their ships that worried the galaxy's powers. The humans had learned, adapted, and evolved in ways that were impossible to predict. Their old enemies, the ones that had crushed them so many years ago, were nowhere to be found. The human fleet was a new breed entirely, one that seemed to come from a completely different era. As the human fleet continued its approach, there was a growing realization among the galactic powers that they were on the verge of something that could change the course of the entire galaxy. The humans weren't just returning to take revenge. They were returning to rebuild their empire. And if that was true, the galaxy's existing powers would have to decide whether to fight, negotiate, or risk being completely consumed by a force that had been lost to history. Humanity's return had shaken the galaxy to its core. There was no going back now. The fleet, once thought to be nothing more than a legend, had emerged. And with it, the human empire, long thought to be dead, was beginning its march to reclaim the stars, humanity's hidden strengths. As the galaxy's leaders scrambled to form a unified response to the growing threat of humanity's return, many began to question one critical fact. How had humanity managed to survive for so long in isolation, and how had they built such a powerful fleet in secret? No one could answer these questions with certainty, but whispers began to spread that humanity's strength was far greater than anyone could imagine. There were old legends told by travelers who had ventured into the uncharted regions of space. Some said that humanity had found ways to adapt, to survive when all hope seemed lost. Others suggested that, rather than fading away, humanity had spent centuries in hiding, watching as the galaxy continued its progress. But the truth, the deeper truth, was far more surprising. It wasn't just that humanity had survived, it was that they had learned. While the rest of the galaxy had moved forward, focusing on building ever greater technologies, humanity had focused on something different: resilience. In the face of overwhelming odds, when humanity was on the brink of extinction, they discovered that their true strength lay not in sheer firepower, but in their ability to endure, adapt, and evolve. The humans had spent generations in isolation, but their knowledge of ancient technologies, once thought lost, had been carefully preserved and enhanced. Rather than focusing on what they lacked, they focused on what they could build. They turned old weapons and ships into something far more powerful than anyone could imagine, using their limited resources with unrivaled efficiency. They built ships that seemed like relics, but these ships had been upgraded with highly sophisticated systems, making them a deadly force to be reckoned with. And the most remarkable thing, their ability to adapt was second to none. No alien race had ever been able to match the pace at which humanity learned. Their engineers, scientists, and strategists were constantly refining and perfecting their technologies, pushing them to new heights. The first signs of humanity's technological leap came in the form of their ship's weaponry. The humans had discovered new ways of harnessing energy, using it in ways that no one had ever thought possible. Their weapons were not just powerful, they were designed to disrupt the most advanced alien shields and defense systems. Their ships moved with an eerie precision, seeming to anticipate the moves of their opponents before they even made them. But perhaps the most shocking part of humanity's return was their mastery of psychological warfare. Humans had learned from their past mistakes, not just in the way they fought, but in the way they interacted with the universe. They understood the power of fear, of doubt, and of uncertainty. Their messages, mysterious, brief, and always cryptic, were calculated to keep the galaxy on edge, never knowing exactly what to expect. This was not the behavior of a species that had just returned from the brink of destruction. This was the behavior of a people who had learned to play the long game, to control the galaxy's perception of them, to manipulate their enemies into making mistakes. The human leaders who had taken charge of this massive fleet were brilliant tacticians. Their ability to think several steps ahead of their enemies was unmatched. Their strategies were unpredictable, unconventional, and often disorienting. While the galaxy's alien species had grown accustomed to straightforward tactics, massive battles, overwhelming force, the humans played a different game. They used their knowledge of alien psychology, their understanding of fear and tension, to keep their enemies in check, They forced the galaxy's leaders to question every move they made, every decision they took. As the human fleet drew closer, the galaxy began to understand the full scope of what they were dealing with. This was not just a fleet of powerful ships. It was a carefully calculated and meticulously planned operation. The humans weren't just trying to conquer the galaxy. They were trying to restore their place in it, reclaim what had been lost. And to do so, they would use every advantage they had: their advanced technology, their psychological warfare, and their ability to adapt and evolve faster than any other species could. The first alien contact with humanity's fleet revealed this terrifying truth. A meeting between representatives of a major galactic power and human diplomats was arranged in neutral space, and the result was nothing short of extraordinary. The humans did not come with offers of peace or diplomacy. Instead, they came with demands. Clear, straightforward demands. They wanted the galaxy's powers to recognize humanity's return and give them a place of honor at the table of galactic rulers. And if the galaxy refused, the consequences were too horrible to imagine. The representatives from the galactic powers were shocked. They had expected to negotiate, to find some middle ground with humanity. But instead, they were faced with a species that was not begging for permission. Humanity had learned, adapted, and now demanded respect. The humans were not interested in alliances, not interested in appeasing others. They wanted control, and they wanted to remind the galaxy that they had always been a force to be reckoned with. The fear that had once been associated with humanity was now realized. They were more powerful, more dangerous, and more determined than anyone could have predicted. And this was only the beginning. The encounter: humans versus aliens. The day the human fleet finally entered the heart of the galaxy, it was as if the stars themselves had darkened in fear. The various alien species, who had once ruled the galaxy with seemingly unchallenged power, now found themselves looking into the unknown. The humans had come, and their presence was not subtle. Their fleet moved like a tidal wave, overwhelming the space lanes, filling every corner of the galaxy with its presence. The time for diplomacy, for waiting, was over. The first true confrontation came when the human fleet met the Varex Empire, one of the galaxy's oldest and most formidable powers. The Varex, a species known for their aggressive expansion and near-indestructible warships, had long been a symbol of galactic dominance. They were used to facing threats head-on, and their military leaders were some of the most feared in the galaxy. But when they met the human fleet in a sector far from their home world, they were faced with something completely unexpected. The Varex fleet, confident and ready for battle, was stunned by the human ship's tactics. Despite the humans' outdated designs and seeming lack of numbers, the human vessels moved with precision and calculated efficiency. Every maneuver was deliberate, every decision seemingly planned for weeks in advance. The human ships did not fight like other species. They didn't engage in massive dogfights or open space battles. Instead, they used their ships' advanced stealth capabilities to stay hidden just outside the Varex's sensors, picking off individual ships, disabling key systems, and causing chaos within the enemy ranks. The Varex commanders quickly realized that this wasn't just a battle of firepower, it was a battle of wits. The humans had somehow anticipated every move the Varex made, and their ships seemed to have a strategy for everything. The Varex, who had once believed themselves to be the masters of war, now found themselves being outplayed by a species they had thought long gone. It was almost as if the humans had been preparing for this moment for centuries. What was even more unsettling was the way the humans seemed to play with their opponents, pulling back and feigning retreats only to lure the Varex into traps. Each battle was a carefully orchestrated performance, and the Varex were the ones unwittingly following the script. It wasn't long before the Varex fleet began to crumble under the pressure, their warships being slowly picked apart, their once proud empire losing its grip on control. But this wasn't just a battle of military tactics. It was also a battle of psychology. The human commanders knew exactly what to say and when to say it. The first communications from the human fleet weren't full of threats or demands. They were simple, calculated words designed to instill doubt. "We've come to claim what's ours. Do you dare stop us?" The Varric's fleet commander, struggling to keep his forces in line, hesitated. The message was clear. The humans weren't here to negotiate. They weren't here to seek peace. They were here to remind the galaxy of their place. The very fact that humanity had returned, stronger and more organized than ever, shook the Varrics to their core. Could they really defeat this species? Or were they doomed to be outsmarted and outmaneuvered at every turn? The human fleet didn't wait for an answer. They didn't need one. Instead, they continued their assault, each move more calculated than the last. Soon, the Varric's forces were scattered, broken apart by the humans' relentless tactics. Despite having superior numbers and firepower, the Varrics could not withstand the precision of the human strategy. Meanwhile, in the command center of the Varric's flagship, their military leaders could only watch in stunned disbelief. The humans, once thought to be a myth, had turned the tide of the battle not with overwhelming force, but with something far more terrifying: intelligence and strategy. It became clear to the Varrics, and soon to the rest of the galaxy, that humanity was not just another species seeking to carve out a place for itself in the stars. They had returned to dominate. The battle ended with a decisive victory for the humans, who quickly claimed control of a major sector of space. The Varric's empire, once considered the greatest military force in the galaxy, was forced to retreat, leaving behind a weakened fleet and a loss of face that would take decades to recover from. But the human fleet did not stop there. They continued to advance, their ships appearing in more and more star systems, slowly but surely taking control of the galaxy's vital trade routes, strategic systems, and even some of its most heavily guarded worlds. The message was clear: humanity had returned, and they would not be ignored. As the rest of the galaxy's powers watched in shock, they realized that the humans were not simply coming to claim a place for themselves. They had come to reassert their dominance. They were not interested in negotiation, not interested in compromise. Humanity had learned from the mistakes of their past, and they were determined to never let anyone forget their strength again. The galaxy, once united in its confidence, now found itself in a state of fear and uncertainty. The question on everyone's mind was not if the humans would take more territory, but how far they would go. The encounter between the Varric's empire and humanity was just the beginning. There were more battles to come, more challenges to face. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was about to face an adversary that it could not underestimate. Humanity, the once forgotten species, had risen again, and they had no intention of being anyone's myth. A galaxy unites against the humans. As humanity's fleet continued to sweep across the galaxy, taking control of more systems and slowly uniting scattered territories under their banner, panic and fear began to spread. The galaxy's old powers, once self-assured and unchallenged, had begun to realize that they were facing something far greater than they had anticipated. Humanity was not just another empire to negotiate with. They were a force, an unstoppable tide that had emerged from the depths of forgotten history. The galactic powers knew that something had to be done, and fast. They could no longer afford to stand by and watch as humanity systematically dismantled their control. One by one, the largest and most powerful empires began to meet in secret. A coalition of species, united not by shared values or goals, but by fear, was formed. The Varric's empire, once proud and nearly invincible, had been humbled, and their military leaders were now seeking alliances with species they had once considered beneath them. The Tark, a technologically advanced race of bioengineered beings, the Urati, known for their incredible psychic abilities, and the Krath, an empire built on political manipulation, each sent emissaries to form a united front against the humans. The council convened in an undisclosed location, hidden far from the reach of human sensors. Representatives from each empire gathered, their faces somber as they discussed their strategy. The alliance was fragile, with each faction bringing their own priorities and mistrust to the table. The Varex demanded a show of force, suggesting that they crush humanity with overwhelming numbers. The Krath, ever cunning, suggested a more subtle approach, sabotaging humanity's communications and causing confusion among their fleet. The Urati, the most powerful telepaths in the galaxy, proposed using their psychic abilities to infiltrate human minds, trying to learn their secrets. Despite their differences, all of the empires agreed on one thing: humanity had to be stopped, and they had to be stopped now, before they grew too strong to defeat. The coalition began to mobilize. Massive fleets of ships, thousands strong, were prepared to engage humanity in open combat. A plan was put into motion, one that would involve every resource the galactic powers had to offer. They would strike at humanity's heart, launching a full-scale assault on the human fleet before it could advance any further. But as the forces began to move, a question hung in the air. Would it be enough? Humanity had already shown that they could outthink and outmaneuver their enemies, and their ships had proven to be far more resilient than anyone had expected. What if the Alliance's combined fleets were simply walking into a trap? Meanwhile, humanity's commanders, though vastly outnumbered, had already anticipated this move. In the quiet corridors of their flagship, a small group of human strategists sat in a dark room, analyzing the data they had gathered on the Galactic Coalition. They knew that the Alliance's strength was in its numbers, but they also understood its weakness. There was no unity, no single cohesive plan. The species in the coalition had been fighting one another for eons, and their brief collaboration was more of a temporary truce than a real partnership. The humans had learned long ago to exploit their enemies' weaknesses, and they were prepared for this. They had been carefully watching the movements of the alien fleets, studying their tactics, their psychology, and their leadership. Every shift in the coalition's position was anticipated, every fleet movement calculated. Humanity's strength lay not in their numbers or their ships, but in their ability to stay one step ahead. Their fleet, though smaller, was a highly specialized force, each ship designed for a specific purpose, each commander handpicked for their ability to think on their feet, to adapt in the moment. Their advantage wasn't just in their technology, it was in their agility. As the coalition's fleets moved into position, ready to launch a devastating attack on the human stronghold, the humans made their move first. A series of calculated distractions were deployed. Ships feigned weakness, and false communications were sent out, luring the combined forces of the coalition into a trap. The humans' mastery of deception and intelligence began to work its magic, with the enemy's fleets split and confused. Suddenly, without warning, the human fleet struck back with devastating precision. What had once seemed like a desperate retreat turned into a fierce counteroffensive. With their smaller, faster ships, the humans quickly disabled key enemy vessels, severing communication between the factions and creating chaos among the Alliance. The Krath, despite their psychic prowess, were caught off guard, their telepathic abilities thrown into disarray as the human fleet launched a series of interference tactics. The Varex, who had hoped for a crushing strike, found themselves locked in battle with a fleet that knew their every move before they made it. The human fleet, though greatly outnumbered, fought with a clarity and focus that the coalition could not match. Each strike, each maneuver, was calculated and precise. The Alliance's unity, once so strong, quickly began to fracture as the different factions argued over tactics, pointing fingers and accusing each other of missteps. The humans, in contrast, remained coldly methodical, picking apart the coalition piece by piece. As the battle raged on, it became clear that the galaxy had underestimated humanity once more. What had started as a desperate, coordinated attack by the galactic powers quickly turned into a defensive struggle for survival. And at the heart of it all, humanity's fleet moved like a serpent in the grass, silent, deadly, and unyielding. The question that had haunted the galaxy from the beginning now echoed louder than ever. Was humanity's return the beginning of a new era, or was it the end of the galaxy as they knew it? The galactic powers were learning a painful lesson. Underestimating humanity had been their greatest mistake. The final showdown and humanity's future. The galaxy was now in the midst of the most intense conflict it had ever faced. The combined forces of the galactic powers, once thought invincible, were now stretched to their limits. Humanity's fleet, smaller in number but infinitely more agile and unpredictable, had turned the tide. What began as an attempt to defeat them had evolved into a desperate struggle to stop them from conquering the galaxy. The coalition, once united by their fear of humanity, had started to fracture under the pressure. Accusations flew among the alien empires, each faction blaming the others for their failures. The Variks, who had initially suggested overwhelming force, found themselves bogged down in endless skirmishes that drained their resources. The Krath, despite their psychic abilities, couldn't anticipate the humans' next move. The Tarku, despite their advanced bioengineering, were forced to contend with a war they couldn't fully comprehend. And the Irati, whose psychic powers had once been used to control lesser species, found themselves unable to read the human minds, constantly thwarted by humanity's unpredictable strategies. In the midst of all this chaos, the human fleet advanced relentlessly. With every victory, their confidence grew, and they pushed deeper into the heart of the galaxy. It became clear that humanity's return wasn't just about survival. It was about reclaiming their place as rulers of the stars. Their fleet was no longer simply a symbol of resistance. It was now a symbol of power, capable of reshaping the entire galactic order. The final showdown came when the combined fleets of the galactic powers assembled for one last desperate stand. It was a massive fleet, the largest ever seen in the galaxy, amassed in the hopes of crushing the human fleet once and for all. Every ship in the Alliance was mobilized, from the largest dreadnoughts to the smallest frigates. They believed that this would be their last chance to stop humanity's rise. If they failed, there would be no galaxy left to rule. Humanity, however, was not intimidated. They had been preparing for this moment for years. They knew that the Alliance would come for them, and they had a plan in place. The human fleet was scattered across multiple star systems, ready to strike when the time was right. But instead of gathering their forces into a single battle line like their enemies had expected, humanity deployed a new tactic: divide and conquer. In the opening stages of the battle, the human fleet's smaller, faster ships struck at the edges of the Alliance's formation, breaking through the outer defenses and causing confusion. The larger ships of the human fleet then moved in, picking off key targets with precision. Each strike was calculated, each move designed to create chaos and mistrust within the Alliance. The galactic forces, already strained and disorganized, found themselves unable to maintain coordination as the humans turned their own tactics against them. The Alliance tried to regroup, but it was too late. Humanity had already seized the initiative. Their advanced technology and battle-hardened commanders, who had fought countless skirmishes and learned from each one, gave them an edge that no one else could match. The human fleet, once thought to be nothing more than a myth, now seemed unstoppable. With each victory, they pushed their enemies further back, breaking through the Alliance's defense lines and taking control of strategic systems. It wasn't just their weapons or their tactics that won the battle. It was their unity. While the galactic powers were divided, each with their own goals and priorities, humanity fought as one. There were no factions within the human fleet, no power struggles or disagreements. They had learned from their past failures, and now they stood united, determined to reclaim their place in the stars. The final blow came when the human fleet launched a decisive strike at the heart of the galactic coalition. The once mighty fleets of the Alliance crumbled under the pressure, their ships scattered and destroyed. The galactic powers, once so sure of their superiority, were now forced to surrender. There was no negotiation, no plea for mercy, only the realization that humanity had returned, and they had come to claim what was rightfully theirs. With the final defeat of the Galactic Coalition, humanity's place in the galaxy was secured. The once forgotten species, whose very existence had been dismissed as a myth, now ruled over a vast empire. They held dominion over countless star systems, their influence spreading like wildfire. The other species in the galaxy, once too proud to consider humans a threat, now had no choice but to bend the knee or face total destruction. In the years that followed, humanity established its new empire. The old myths of their strength and resilience were no longer just stories. They were the foundation of a new era. The galaxy, once fractured and chaotic, now found itself under the rule of a species that had risen from the ashes of its past. The humans had reclaimed their place as the dominant force in the galaxy, their legacy forever etched in the stars. As the human empire grew, so did its understanding of its role in the galaxy. They ruled not through sheer force, but through a combination of power, intelligence, and strategy. The galaxy had learned a valuable lesson. Never underestimate humanity, for they had a resilience and determination that could not be matched. And as humanity looked to the future, one thing was certain: they would never again be forgotten. From myth to reality, they had emerged victorious, and the galaxy would never be the same again.